Thank you, Ivy. Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. I'm Bart Epstein from the nonprofit EdTech Evidence Exchange and the University of Virginia School of Education and Human Development. We have folks dialed in today from EdTech companies, investors, researchers, media, philanthropists, nonprofits, and policymakers. I'm thrilled that you all are taking time out of your schedule to hear from our experts about issues of EdTech equity. Very important topic, especially now. Before I introduce today's guests, I'd like to give you a 3-minute update on the progress of the work of the EdTech Evidence Exchange being done on behalf of the whole education sector. As you know, our education sector is extremely fragmented into approximately 100,000 schools across 14,000 districts that are likely to collectively spend more than $50 billion this year on EdTech products and services. The high stakes decisions that our schools make about what to buy and how to implement their purchases will be well-intentioned, yet if the future holds to the pattern of the past, more than half of this spending is likely to be wasted as we waste tens of billions of dollars and hundreds of millions of hours of lost student learning that will inevitably be inequitably distributed. A root cause of this problem is the lack of information about what works where and why. Our nation's 3 million plus educators are trapped in what economists call a collective action problem. Every school and every educator would benefit if everybody else carefully documented and shared their experiences with individual EdTech products. But it isn't rational for any individual school or teacher or administrator to carefully document its own work and simply put it out into the world. And so we all remain in the dark. Solving this problem requires 3 things. First, we need shared language to describe the ways in which our schools are similar to and different from each other in the ways that drive EdTech success. Second, we need some place for educators to document their work so that they can learn from each other. And third, we need somebody to incentivize the hundreds of thousands of educators who we want to carefully document their work so we can all learn from their experiences. I'm pleased to share progress on all of these fronts. Next week, we will release the final report from our multi-year EdTech Genome Project, which brought together the education sector together to reach national consensus on how to describe and measure our school environments. This month, we have also moved the EdTech Evidence Exchange software platform from alpha to beta testing. It is not open to the general public yet, but we have begun to use it to collect and validate our new instruments as we collect contextual feedback and standardized EdTech reviews from our first several thousand educators in the field. As we reach these important milestones in our work, much of our attention will soon turn to the search for philanthropy support to power the next phase of our work. The information we need to make better decisions is trapped in the heads of millions of teachers and administrators who are understandably exhausted. If we want them to each spend an hour giving us contextually rich feedback about the experiences they're having with EdTech, then we need to pay them professional grade cash stipends. This is what works. We are soon to begin raising money to make it possible to pay stipends like these to tens and eventually hundreds of thousands of educators. So as always, we are grateful for your ideas, warm introductions, and support as we embark on that process. And now on to our main event. I'd like to start by introducing Jared Joyner. Jared leads the educational practice portfolio at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, which is focused on promoting practices, tools, strategies, and pedagogies grounded in the science of learning and human development. Prior to joining the education team at CZI, Jared served as Chief of Staff in the Department of Technology at San Francisco Unified School District, and before that was a product manager at an educational technology startup. Welcome, Jared.
Thanks so much for having me, Bart.
I'm so glad that you could make it. Is Ron on the line?
I am having some technical difficulties, but I was able to sneak it on my phone, so I'm happy to be here.
All right. Thank you for sticking with it early in the morning on the West Coast. Dr. Ron Smith is the VP of Philanthropy at Salesforce. He is an Oakland, California native with 20 years of experience in the education field. Since joining Salesforce.org in 2017, Ron has overseen more than 40 million of investments, built partnerships with schools across the US and Europe, and led the global Circle the Schools volunteering program. Ron, welcome.
Thank you so much. Excited to join.
Great. Well, let's dive right in. Jared and Ron, you two fascinating leaders are working hard every day to improve our education system. I'd like to start by asking you about your own journeys. Can you tell us a bit, Jared, about your background and experience and why you're doing the work you're leading right now at CZI?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I started my career as a classroom teacher in Washington, D.C., and I was working in a school where students hadn't had success in traditional public schools, and so it was an alternative program, and so that kind of working with those students and keeping them engaged just led me to fall in love with education. And so I continued my career into graduate school, and then worked in the Boston Public Schools for a number of years in their central office, trying to, again, have broader impact. But it really, EdTech didn't fully cross my radar in terms of understanding the complexities of it until I worked for a startup out here in the Bay Area after my time in Boston. And frankly, it was one of my worst jobs that I've ever had, because the CEO was not focused on building a product that worked well for students under a particular set of conditions. He was really trying to turn a profit. Now, that soured me on educational technology, which is why I joined San Francisco Unified School District, because I wanted to prevent those types of actors from gobbling up the limited dollars that the public school district had. And then now at CZI, I'm fortunate to really bring together all of these different experiences to work on supporting programs that are really focused on making sure that educational technology and other resources work well for students under particular sets of conditions.
That's great. Thank you, Jared. Ron, same question to you. Can you tell us a bit more about your background and experience and why you're doing the type of work you're leading right now at Salesforce?
Sure, Bart. Thank you again. So for the first 20 years of my career started as a classroom teacher, then a principal at the elementary and secondary level, and really just looked at how we were doing the transformation work for students, specifically working in Oakland, and looking at just the separation of those that have and have not. And it really just empowered me. I finished my career there doing turnaround networks and really looking at transformations of schools. Within that, the opportunity came to Salesforce to expand and on a more global scale and work in the same type of communities, but not just locally here in the Bay Area, but across the United States and around the world. And that just afforded me the chance to really have a greater impact. Within that work and talking with you, Bart, and just different individuals around data and just seeing the fear and how people use not only data, but different programs, it really just gave me the opportunity to have a conversation and try and say, here are some opportunities for us to really engage, look at ways to transform lives of students, and we need to take those chances, and we need to use this time in history to make the change and make the difference. We've been empowered since I started as a teacher well over 20 plus years ago, and now we are trying to continue making the change in education.
Can you guys talk a bit about what types of equity in EdTech you're most concerned about? The pandemic has had a devastating impact on tens of millions of students, many of whom already faced numerous challenges, and Congress has appropriated an unprecedented amount of money, $200 billion in pandemic-related funding to support our nation's schools, and a large portion of that is going to be spent on EdTech. What are your thoughts about how effectively and equitably the money is likely to be spent, and what types of equity issues in EdTech are on the forefront for your minds?
Yeah, happy to jump in here. I think one thing that comes to mind is who is, and you have to, my cat is, of course, wants to join as soon as I start talking. We have to think about who's involved in the decision making. And I think that as we're with this great opportunity, we have run the risk of doing things as historically have been done, where there's a single decision maker kind of going through this process to decide how these dollars get spent. But we really need to focus on involving the folks in the community, students, teachers, families, in the decision making on how those dollars can be spent. Additionally, on top of that, I think it's really important that we don't just spend the dollars and move it out the door, because as districts can sometimes be under pressure to spend the monies as quickly as possible rather than having them be stuck. But we also have to measure how we're using the money. And I think there's a really huge opportunity to better understand how this investment works. And if we don't gather evidence on how these programs or EdTech that we're purchasing are used, then there's a huge wasted opportunity. We're not really learning anything more about what works for our students. So those are the two suggestions that I might offer there.
Just to really add on to what Jared was saying, just there's definitely a fear of repeating the history, really looking at, let's just go and invest in what we've done. It's familiar, it's comfortable, and that automatically creates a gap. Are you providing additional training for teachers? Are you really hearing the voices of the community? Are you hearing the voices of the students, for that matter? Are you engaging so you're making the correct decisions? Is definitely a fear, because, and Jared alluded to it, it has to get out the door. There's a timestamp, there's an ending to this. So the concept of just having money and it's going to be there forever is just not true. Second thing that I feel that sometimes is overlooked is we've reached a point in history unlike any other. The amount of money infused, the conversation. But the question is, are we using the right tools and resources to diagnose a problem and then try and come up with a solution and move forward? Or are we just saying, here's the problem, yes, we recognize it, we're just going to figure it out? And I fear that if we don't make the right decisions, if we're not using the proper tools, if we're not hearing all the voices, we're going to revert back to the systems that are safe and comfortable, and then the money's going to get spent. And we're then going to look at data 5 years from now and say, oh my God, we wasted all this time. So I think that's something key. And then lastly, how are we demystifying the tools? How are we coming up with something that's proven, that's been used in other areas, and can be used across the different cities and countries? And then from that data, how are we informing people how to use it and really being thoughtful and disaggregate decisions? Because the one thing we have to avoid, falling in love with this today and then saying, oh, this will just take care of us for the next 5 years. We have to iterate, we have to look at it again, we have to make sure we make decisions to transform the lives of students. And that is an equity issue. You just assume it's going to fit everybody and one size fits all. You're automatically already addressing, saying that you're not looking at equity as a lever for change.
In your experience, are the creators of EdTech products representative of the communities that they serve?
I'll jump in, Bart. I definitely know. I mean, one of the things I remember when gamification came around and they were saying, well, the kids are playing video games, so we're going to do this. And the video games were in a format that wasn't familiar for the kids. And I remember the kids saying something like, well, this doesn't look like the video games I have. And I'm like, well, it's gamification. They're trying to engage you. And I remember students telling me, well, this isn't fun. This isn't a game. This is just the same thing, but with more colors, and the same thing, but more. So there was a disconnect. It was, again, one size fits all. They weren't going to the community and say, okay, let's talk about what engaged you. That doesn't mean you have to come up with the world's greatest game and make it seem like, oh my God, it can only work in inner city Oakland or Chicago or New York. No, but you want to have that dialogue with the youth. Or the young adults, or even the teachers are implementing it and say, hey, in your community, what's needed? How are you using this? These 3 tools you seem to use the most. Which one is the best so we can even go deeper? And those conversations just don't happen. And without those conversations, we just tend to assume. But I'm turning my video off. I know there's some technical issues, so I'm hoping if I just speak.
All right, thank you, Ron. While you work on that, let me throw it over to Jared.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, and definitely building on some of what Ron shared. I mean, I think that in my experience and in a lot of the companies that we see, unfortunately, the product developers and the CEOs and the folks in these organizations are not always representative of the communities they serve. And so that's not to say that means that they shouldn't make these tools, but I think that if they're not representative of the communities they serve, and even if they are, they have to go that extra step to engage with the communities they're trying to serve. So what does that mean? That means getting, as Ron said, getting into dialogue, getting into conversations with young people who look like the demographic they're trying to serve. If it's Black, Brown, and Indigenous students, they need to have focus groups and dialogues, or even really, and just have the conversation. I think you also have to have conversations with educators themselves, because they're going to be responsible for implementing this product at the end of the day. It could be helpful to have a conversation with parents so that they're on board, so you can understand what their concerns are, whether it's data privacy or otherwise. I think if there's other subpopulations of students where, sometimes there's intersectional issues, whether it's English language learners, if it's students with exceptional learning needs, they also need to be part of it, because again, we can't have this one-size-fits-all approach to EdTech development and products, and we have to really make sure that the students that we want to benefit from these tools are involved in the development process along the way.
So I hear a lot, Jared, about things that people should do. Most often in a free market, what people do is what makes sales. And so I'm wondering about your thoughts about how we bridge this divide between what sells and what's right. What's the role of different actors? And where are the pressure points that we can apply? Is it pressure on investors? Is it the federal government funding more research? Is it better help of documentation so we can understand what's working where and why? In a recent EdTech roundtable fireside chat that I co-hosted with Chris Rush, I asked the director of IES, which is the federal arm of the Department of Ed that does research. I asked him what percentage of EdTech products have been properly studied, rounded to the nearest 5%. And his answer was 0. Out of 9,000 EdTech products, we have done efficacy research on virtually none of them. How are we going to improve the system when individual school districts don't have an incentive to do research and we're not doing it centrally?
Yeah, I think that, I think the short answer is all of the above, but that you listed of who's responsible. I think that, even from the philanthropy perspective, we often encourage our grantees and partners, if they are developing products, to take a more inclusive approach. And we might even provide additional grant dollars to help support them in doing that. But if you're building a tool for young people, you need to have young people involved in that. And that is kind of, we try to be firm with that. And I think that from the investor perspective, it's, even if they might not be willing to make that investment for altruistic reasons, I think that it will improve the product and it might improve their return down the road. If it is about dollars and cents, you will build a better product if you're involving the communities that it's supposed to serve. I also think, to your point around measurement and evaluation, I do think that is a place where there's obviously growth across the sector, whether it is in the school district, you know, and whether they often in their research departments don't have the bandwidth to do the sort of improvement analyses that one might need on how things are working. I think similarly, you still have to put the onus on the ed tech companies to identify what opportunities there might be for them to gather their own evidence, which again, can only help but further sales or give them places where they can improve their tool. I do think that, you know, we can't go one thing that I would want us to combat is kind of the need to go all the way to the efficacy, the randomized control trial. Everyone's not ready for that, but everyone should be measuring something along the way to get there one day.
That's a great point. Ron, if you're able to jump back in, I know you're struggling with a little tech issue. We apologize for that. Go right ahead.
Can you hear me right now, Bart? Just want to make sure.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So one thing, I just want to piggyback up on that last point that was made. It's really important for us as a community to, one, again, hear the voices of the constituents. So we have to hear from students, teachers, and everything. Two, demystify the data, making sure that the data is utilized and understood and really disaggregated so you're coming to the right decisions. But three, and I think this is the key part, there's been such a fear around measurement and analysis that, oh my God, if I look at this and it tells me this, then I'm gonna have to make a change, or I don't know how to read it even, or what do I then do? We have to figure out, both from the provider side, from the implementer side, from the partnership side, how to demystify what data is telling us. We use data in the morning to guide us through our day. We gauge how much water we've had. We gauge our food, how hungry we are. These are all different forms of data, from working out to looking at a student assessment sheet. And because we have grown to fear it within education, we now look at it as almost a tool of evil. It's like, oh my God, it's this evil thing that's going to come tell us something. And we have to really look at evidence as a driver for change. And I feel like, you know, just hearing that EdTech companies aren't evaluating the tools, or districts aren't evaluating the tools, they're buying it based upon a relationship they've had in the past. The only way we're going to get away from that is continuing to grow, invest in evidence as a driver for change, not as a tool for marketing. And if we do that investment and do that analysis, it'll help us make the proper decisions and really drive change for students in the communities.
Thank you, Ron. I want to ask a little bit different question about the different ways that EdTech is used in different communities. We've seen anecdotal information that suggests that students are not getting equal access to different types of EdTech. Are you seeing and hearing about disparities about the most empowering and sophisticated maker products and things that are, you know, creative and creating products and you know, student engagement, as opposed to things that are more drill and kill?
Definitely. I mean, we're definitely seeing that, I think, at least anecdotally, and also from just experience in schools as well. And I think it's rather unfortunate. And I think that's a place where one could be attributable, one, to the lack of training that we're offering educators in terms of how EdTech can be used, and two, this notion of kind of just like dropping it in. And I think that if we're not supporting educators to really do more with the tools that, and also for not building tools that actually lead to these the higher order thinking skills for students or activities even, then we're not setting up the teachers for success as well. So I think there's kind of two places where that struggle kind of shows up, particularly if you look across the types of schools where these types of drill and kill-ish EdTech products might be getting implemented or sold.
You know, Joel, just to add to that one piece, I do think we're still in this space where, especially when you're looking at students that are behind academically, historically, those are Black and brown students and, you know, hard to serve areas, we tend to just fall back into drill and kill because we're like, they have to have this skill set. And so let's just simply give them this, and this will help get them caught up. What that then does, again, addressing the question of equity, for those students who are on grade level or above, it gives an opportunity to be creative, to be collaborative, to really think in groups and really dive deeper into the work. And you're already separating a divide in the same classroom, literally 5 feet from each other. You have one group that's having the opportunity to expand and really think through the process and use the tools, what they're meant for, to be creative and individualized. And then you have another set of groups that they're just doing drill and kill and multiplication and basic reading skills. And that in itself is something that we've created historically. It's been around probably since the beginning of time within education, and we just continue to stay in that rut. So as long as we're in that rut and don't think about the fact that we have to have access and opportunities for every student, and that goes back to parents advocating for it, teachers advocating for it, groups such as this advocating for it, just everyone has to say it's unacceptable for us to fall back into that same system and then think that that's going to solve all our education problems as we move forward in the future.
Thank you. I'm going to ask the magic wand question. And I'd like it to be as specific as you possibly can, because that there's one thing that keeps coming across here. It's the need for concerted but diffuse action. There's not any one person out there who is a roadblock. It sounds as though there are things that teachers can do, and EdTech companies can do, and investors can do, the federal government, nonprofits. What are at the top of your list of things that you would ask different players in our sector to keep in mind and to do to help make equity an issue that gets sufficient attention so that we can make progress?
I think if I could only choose one thing, I think that it would be back to this issue of everyone in the system talking to students more and to hearing from them, and whether it's through a user research interview for a product developer, or whether it's from a superintendent or a district leader having more dialogues with students and young people in their district, to even teachers sharing power in their specific classrooms. But I think if we start kind of go to that really hard place of having more dialogues and more conversations with young people, we're going to see the holes in our ways of thinking, and how we can just get better across the board. And I think if we kind of stretch ourselves to take that effort to talk to students, I think it's going to cause a radical shift in the system.
100% to that around engaging students and making sure their voice is heard. The only thing I'll add is I think we have to re-educate educators and parents and those adults in the system on what that is used for, how to analyze it, and then how to make changes once you've looked at it. And that is not easy by any stretch of the imagination. So I don't want to downplay it as a simple thing to do, but we have to demystify what it means. And the reason I include families in that is, we've for years created systems, created tools, and sent reports to families. And the question we always ask is, how are they looking at it? And what are they doing with it? And for that case, sometimes teachers as well. So we have to re-educate them on the use of data, apply it to real world examples, and then really just make sure that it's implemented. It just can't be in general, once a year, we do standardized testing, or we use these tools to get an assessment at the beginning of the year. We have to have standardized time set up where we're providing support, we're providing time, and we're providing tools and opportunities to take next steps. And if we can retrain the individuals who are guiding the work in connection with what Jared said around hearing student voice, we'll then be able to have change in the outcomes for our students that are in greatest need.
Well, that sounds like a great plan. I hope that many people have been listening and paying attention to these two wise leaders. This work is never ending. And I think one thing we can take away is we're all part of it, and we can all have an impact. Jared, any closing thoughts or words before we say goodbye?
No, thank you again for this opportunity to speak, and really appreciate the work that you all are doing. Just love everything.
Thank you. Ron, any parting words?
Just thank you again as well, and I always enjoy this conversation. I apologize for the technical issues, but just excited to be able to still join it at the end.
Thank you all so much for joining us today. We're going to say goodbye. If you have ideas for future EdTech roundtables and other specific great guests you'd like to see us invite, you have my email. Thank you and have a great week.